that we're here. And I want to thank you for being here today. Now, before we start, I wanted to talk about Lao Tzu, the famous Chinese philosopher you may be familiar with. Oh, I think not, because the screen is going to be the focus. Fortunately, not me. Lao Tzu once said that the reality of a glass is the volume within. And that means a lot to me, because my interest in architecture as a young student was, as most people's, from the beginning you start on the outside and you work in. But I found out after years of research that it's the volume within that's so important. And that's where electromagnetic energy, bioenergy as we call it, comes in. It's been my major focal in work in the last 30 years of my work. So I'm going to talk a lot about that in the second half. We're looking at these images, the first half of my presentation, and a lot of it is research. I want to tell you that architecture is not as simple as you might think it is. And it takes a great deal of research to find all of the necessary knowledge to develop structures that are not only healthy, but ecologically sound for the environment. So much of what is built is not of that ilk, I'm sorry to say. It's at the university where the greatest strides have been made in improving the art of architecture. And I've been fortunate to be in that realm ever since a professor at LSU had a heart attack. And they called me up, working in an office, and offered me the position. And from then on, I became a great devotee of education and architecture. The research books you see here are very important. The body electric, obviously, is one that you will want to look into to understand how your body relates to the environment. And electromagnetic energy is an important part of that. The most important book you will see in this collection of research books is The God's Machines, in the middle of the top row. And what you will find in that book is a history of important structures for the thousands of years that have been developed around the world, that were developed because of the energy in the volume. The author of that book befriended me. I didn't realize it at the time. He discovered my work on the internet, and he reacted to it. He did so much research, it's mind-boggling. He was a fairly young man, but he retrieved information that developed a book that is a cross-sectional review of structures built because of bioenergy around the world. Churches being important type of buildings in that way. You will notice in this photograph a tetrahedral sphere, a Rillieux sphere it's called. A French engineer developed that, and you will notice this is a this is a photograph of infrared nature, so that you can see the energy in the core, in the heart. And that bioenergy is a good place for you to be. The radiance is very strong there. Corners in buildings are not the best place to be. They are known as dead spaces. When we get to this slide, you will notice so many of the books that I've used through the years to develop the polemic I have in environmental design. There are some slides that relate to UFO research and development. There is a huge amount of knowledge coming out of that field because of the advanced technology that the UFO craft utilize. I want you to remember this quotation. If you want to find the secret of the universe, think in terms of energy, frequency, and vibration. Everything in this room is vibrating, you and I, the space itself, and we interrelate in a way that can be good or not. And it's very important to be able to discover potentials of spherical volume and conical volume. Now, the UFO scene history is fascinating, and one of the most fascinating books is the one selected by extraterrestrials. I actually met the gentleman who wrote that book. He was about 95 years old when I met him, and he had been at China Lake. My wife had been at China Lake in the 50s, it was the mid-50s. His task was to fly purloined secret plans of German UFO craft from the naval base here in San Diego to China Lake, where scientists and engineers were back engineering spacecraft. They actually built a tunnel between China Lake and a factory in a mountain in Utah. And Marianne's first husband was deeply involved in that, but it was so secret that she had no knowledge of this. It took a lot of research for me to find out about it on the internet. We're headed for Mars, as you know, and that is going to be a very exciting time. I wish we would be around for that, but those who will, it's going to be a tremendous experience. A lot of people working on it. Elon Musk, as you know, a very talented man, is in the middle of that effort. In 2019, I had an exhibition downtown San Diego of radiant architecture, which is the type of work that I do, where bioenergy plays a great role. So this will just give you a brief introductory, and we will now look at the individual images. One last one I should go back, Robert. The upper right is the spacecraft I saw in 1959. No, excuse me, that's 1947. I saw that craft. I was 15 years old. And that's a photograph of it taken in 52 by a gentleman by the name of George Adamski. Now I'm going to sit down and I'll talk about this a bit more carefully. Remember, this is the first half of the presentation. The second half, you'll see my designs largely. All right, we're going to start with the flower. And a beautiful bioenergy structure there ever was is the flower. It's a great solar receptor. It's certainly a beautiful biomorphic structure. It has tremendous strength to take wind, and it is tensile. It's much stronger than a very heavy blockish structure. I'm very happy to tell you that my students won a competition at the architectural school, San Luis Obispo, because they built a tensile structure. We'll see that later. Now, I'll go on. The first three images are all natural body. This is a fish underwater, of course, and you will see that it's basically domical, but it is a tensile structure. It's also very aesthetic. It's very beautiful. And I always would tell my students, nature is our best guide. That's been the major advice I've given over the years. The dome, as you know, has a huge amount of bioenergy. Now, hurricanes is where I grew up in the Gulf South, a very common experience in the autumn. And It's a vortex, a powerful vortex of energy. No one wants to enjoy a hurricane, although it fascinates people. Many people refuse to flee them. They want to stay, and they even party in the ambiance of the hurricane. Well, that's dangerous. I don't advise that. But the vortex is valuable to understand as a volume of great energy. Again, the book, then you notice from Stonehenge to crop circles, which is quite a long gamut of time and history in structures. I can't think of a more beautiful structure than Stonehenge as a ruin, and it served many purposes, as you well know, and we don't have time to go into all of that, so I'm going to have to go on by it. This is the structure photographed by George Adamski in 1952 that I saw in 47. You may not know this, but at Vista, the GAF Foundation of George Adamski, he passed away, but there are people who run this organization. You can find it on the internet. He was a photographer, and he took the most amazing photographs of UFOs I've ever known. This was the one I saw. Incidentally, those photographs were examined by the Kodak company in Rochester, New York, to confirm their authenticity. This is an advertisement for my first lecture in London in 1994. And it was at the New School of Architecture there, which is considered the finest school of architecture in Europe. I'm very grateful that I had the honor to speak there. And I did share with them knowledge that they had not been taught that dealt with bioenergy structures. We're seeing two of them in the illustration. On the lower photograph is a plantation, a modern plantation, solar energized, wind energized, and developed for a family of several generations so that a family could stay together. And it is a now, that last image was of a 1994 lecture. This is a 1972 lecture I made to a national conference, IDEC conference, and it's probably the most important presentation I ever made because it introduces bioenergy design, what I call radiant architecture, to a national audience. The book, The Body Electorate, is very famous, widely known, and full of knowledge, very profound knowledge, recommended to you. Some of my work I call California Radiant Architecture. The slide or image number 4 on the left is a large villa I built, and it is devoted to the idea of living out of doors, where the swimming pool, the family has a outdoor living area, which is not uncommon in California, but you'll notice that it's aerodynamic. And one fact that I want to stress is my interest in aerodynamic architecture to resist the high winds of hurricanes. And also, they're stronger for tremblers, earthquakes. The image down in the bottom, number 5, excuse me, this says 6, number 8, is the universal spheroid that is one of the most unusual of my designs because it opens up like the eyelid of the human. I will talk more about that later. Now, Secrets of Cosmic Knowledge, Biotronic Energy Prototypes. The lower 2 energy on the bottom row are the designs of Tesla, who you may or may not know something about. the gentleman the car is named after, who used electromagnetic energy to propel a spacecraft of his own design that he would energize from towers built around the Earth. Now, Tesla was opposed by Edison, and although he was a genius, Edison had so much power and political strength that he couldn't resist some of the rather unfortunate efforts that Edison made to stop his marvelous projects from reaching reality. Color, light, energy. That is how I became interested in bioenergy, starting off with color and light in New Orleans. As a young architect, I should say that the first 5 years of my practice as an architect was building wood structures at a reasonable price with plenty of glass, modern, very quickly put together and affordable structures, which I've always been interested in affordable architecture. I will tell you that less than 1% of the people in this country can afford to build a house. And I think this is terrible. So one of my missions in teaching architecture was affordability. And this is the real tetrahedron again, with the brightly lit center from its bioenergy strength. Now, the pyramids in Egypt have a long history behind the research in bioenergy in cones and pyramids. The cone and the pyramid are very similar, and along with the sphere is where you find the greatest result in bioenergy. They're Gauss meters, they can measure this, but the Kirlian photograph, which you see in the lower left, is a very good way to visualize the bioenergy in a conical or spherical volume. There are many valuable books to help you in researching the pheromones, unseen energy, unseen forces that we're surrounded by. Some of them are not very good. I remember where we lived previously, we could see the energy towers at the top of Mount Soledad, and it's not wise to be living near those towers. You may be well aware of that. The environment is filled with all kinds of synthesized energy. Natural energies are my major interest. This is the quotation I'm asking you to remember from Nikola Tesla himself. If you want to find the secrets of the universe, think in terms of energy, frequency, and vibration. My own research now, several books you will see here were standard references for me to share with my students over the almost 30 years I taught in the architectural schools. I taught in 3 architectural schools without any degree based on the work I'd done in the first 5 years of my career in architecture. But when I discovered the ability to research as a professor, it did a great deal to improve my ability to design better structures. The author of this book, David Wilcock, is well known in UFO circles. I've heard him lecture. He's very good. And in this book, he will share with you knowledge about the bioenergy structures, in particular the cones and the pyramids. The Russians have built a number of test structures based on bioenergy, some of them 100 and 200 feet high. I've had the fortune of lecturing all over the world, this at Dornach, Switzerland. The Rudolf Steiner Institute was the most important place I ever lectured in terms of bioenergy. Rudolf Steiner himself had discovered the phenomena, and his followers to this day are very intently involved, many of them architects, many of them professors. It's a marvelous place to go. If you're ever in Switzerland, visit Dornach. The poster for my exhibition in downtown San Diego, that is an elevation of my house built here in La Jolla in 1980, the Silver Ship, which won me an entry to the Paris Biennale in 1985. Now, there are a lot of gifted science-oriented people, engineers, and other technologically oriented people in the field of UFO research. Michael Schratt is the most talented of the group that I have ever heard lecture. His drawings and his knowledge of high-tech spacecraft design, whether they are alien, ET, or American. We have back-engineered many ET craft, and as I've mentioned to you before, have factories that build these structures and these craft, and they are seen all over. This is the book I recommend, written by William Tompkins, who believed, and I share that belief of his, that he was selected by E.T. I have many times reflected on that in terms of my own life in architecture and design. I believe that I've been very lucky in finding my path, and I'm wondering if it's more a synchronicity than luck. John Brandenburg is a distinguished and brilliant expert on the UFO field. You will notice that on the illustration number 6 to the right is the ARV. That was the first spacecraft built by American secret efforts based on ET spacecraft, the ARV, Alien Reproduction Vehicle. You can see a drawing of it in the lower left. You will meet these people at UFO conferences, not at architectural conferences. I recommend this book to you because I have met the author and his son, Robert Wood and Ryan Wood, brilliant researchers in the UFO field. I used to attend their conferences in Arizona and Nevada, devoted to the crash sites, ET craft rescued and re-examined and re-engineered, back-engineered. They had a lot of knowledge of that. And Robert Wood, PhD, also a long involved engineer in Los Angeles for the space industry, is one of the leading researchers. Now he is at least my age or older. He's been involved for a long time. Lately I've had the honor to meet over the internet the lady here who developed this film and a book on the Phoenix Lights. Dr. Lynn Ketai is a brilliant medical doctor who saw the gigantic UFO go over Phoenix in 1997. The craft was about a mile wide, and 10,000 people saw it. So you can imagine the impact it made in Arizona. The governor of Arizona actually witnessed this himself, and although he refused to talk about it at first, years later he admitted to it, and his wife remarked that she had never seen him as terrified as he was after witnessing that craft. Now, I've heard the author of this book many times, and I will tell you that as time goes on, Mars is the exciting destination for the space industry. When you get to the extraterrestrial history on this Earth, and also the American secret space program, you get into some very, very difficult material to research and talk about. I've had the fortune of hearing several very good presentations by insiders in this field. It's impossible for them to keep all the secrets, the government, that they would like to keep secret. And gradually, more and more of it is coming out. The stone wall is cracking. As time goes on, you are going to find out amazing information. Now, all of the research I've been talking about leads up to my design for a UFO ET center, Research and Technology Center, built in the California desert. I have two illustrations of that here. A very large compound for research and also museum presentations and exhibitions. There is a huge interest internationally in the UFO history as it's expanding. There is an organization called the National UFO Reporting Center in the state of Washington that receives thousands of sightings per year. And you can find it on the internet if you would like to look into it yourself. In 1969, I was hired to teach here at San Diego State. But just before, I had an exhibition at Tulane University where I earned my Master of Fine Art degree. And you will notice in the center of the room a stylized craft expressing the sighting that I had as a young boy. And the electrographic quality of the paintings fits into that syndrome. In 1975, I had the fortune of being invited to exhibit at the Aspen Design Conference, and these are two panels I put together for that conference. And you will notice that some of my designs, even as early as 1975, were biomorphic in nature. They were not boxes, I realized. So we'll move on. In 1995, I had an exhibition in downtown where I summarized my interest in bioenergy in architecture. And these 4 panels, a 4-foot square, contain a number of the graphics, both drawings and photographic illustrations that together form a synergy of research and design in radiant architecture. This was the first major exhibition I had in San Diego of structures that used bioenergy. Another panel, and you will notice the graphics of collages. Some of you who were here for my first presentation will remember seeing some of these graphics in firsthand, and collage is an important part of that. My mother used collage when I was a boy, and I think that may have rubbed off on me. Now, this is the first slide of 3 you're going to see for a design I made for the people of France. France, as you well know, is an important part of my history. And when they had the huge fire at Notre Dame Cathedral, it was terrible for me to witness how badly that church had become. And the story or the history of it is the French government wanted to have a competition. And I was very excited, and I wanted to enter that competition. And I made this design. It's a crystal cone. And the concept is the cone replaces the old wooden one that they had, but it utilizes bioenergy over the altar. And You will see that from the side elevation. These renderings were made by a former student of mine by the name of Joe Cardell, a brilliant young architect who assisted me on that project. And this is the perspective that visualizes being in the church with the biotronic energy cone, the crystal cone above. Now, there are a lot of historical people that whose work leads up to my own work, and one of them is Leonardo da Vinci. Leonardo da Vinci actually played a role in my own family's life and history in Europe. We don't have the time for me to go into it here, but this particular design of Leonardo's is for a fortress. The design is 500 years ahead of anybody else. It is unlike other fortresses, not high, not boxy, built out of brick and ready to crumble. It actually is very low profile. It's aerodynamic, and it is very organic, very fluid, very biomorphic, and very natural. A brilliant design, far ahead of anybody else in that field. Now, you will find that spherical volumes are my major interest in architecture. And there are many ways one can develop the internal volume. This dome we're seeing, which is truly a sphere, I had the pleasure of, as a young professor at LSU, listening to Buckminster Fuller speak for 4.5 hours. After 2 hours, some people left. After 3 hours, most people left, and not all, but many. I hung in there, and I'm glad I did, because the last hour was his best hour. And I'm telling you, if there's any one man that turned my life around as a speaker in architecture, it's Buckminster Fuller. I will say this about my view of the volume. It's not easy to build in a sphere, but there are ways you can do it. And one of the ways I'm interested in is developing what are known as sets, all with capital letters. That is where the family hasn't just the usual house, but has an environment that relates to their passions. It becomes almost theatrical in that sense. I don't have the time to go into it any further than that right now, but for anyone interested, I'm happy later to talk about it. At SDSU, I had the ability to utilize technology to create images that reflected my energy interest, my bioenergy interest. And I used television for that, and we're seeing 4 images of that sort here. Now, I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with crop circles from the UFO history, and that's always been an inspiration to me. And surrounded the crop circle, you will see a lot of the work of my students and myself at SDSU. On the lower right, the number 9 image, you will see an environment in a class I invented. I actually taught 7 classes there and wrote 4 of them. That one was called Synergetic Environments, where the students actually built full-size environments out of affordable materials, largely cardboard and wood, things they could find. In this case, it was for a landing site for a spacecraft. Now, on a probably a more profound level, is my interest in spot-type archetypes and prototypes. And considering the power of the cone and the sphere, this is a design for a garden. Most people have what they call backyards. Some people have what they call back gardens. The Japanese are very good about archetypes and prototypes like tea houses. and other spiritually oriented structures in gardens, perhaps for sound or poetry. And my interest is health, where a structure developed with bioenergy can improve people who are enjoying the sunshine and fresh air, and also other means of expanding their psyche. We notice here the unisphere up on the top two, the openable spheroid structure that I mentioned earlier. This was my LSU exhibition, another view of it. Now, my family in New Orleans were Knights Templar heritage, and they built the only domed sugar mill at New Orleans in 1790, using the same technology that was used by Thomas Jefferson at Monticello, the lamella to form the dome. And I will tell you, by sheer genetic memory perhaps, I was able to use lamellas to build my house here in La Jolla in 1980, to develop a vault, not a dome. Incidentally, my ancestors won the sugar prize from the sugar processed under that dome. Now here's Mary Ann at the Gruyere Castle of my ancestors in Switzerland. It so happened it snowed that day in May, but to us it was a joy being there. And I can tell you that they were friends of Leonardo. We don't have the time to go into the history. He actually visited there on his way from Italy to France. I just got a message from a professor here in California who likes this particular design. He's a very noted architect and professor, and this is my concept for a hotel at Hong Kong in a competition, the Peak. In this case, the suites all open up to the view of the beautiful bay at Hong Kong, using the unisphere concept. And here is the unisphere itself in a larger image, and detail a model of the Peak Hotel. This is my own students' winning project at San Luis Obispo using the unisphere concept. It's interesting that the students at the university there in San Luis Obispo actually built a structure out of concrete blocks, which they had a crane to lift into position. It stormed that night, and their concrete block building collapsed. And our students won first place the next day using a very light, prefabricated tensile structure. Now, this shows some of the biomorphic and biotronic prototypes that I've designed over the years. In the middle is a chapel, library, and observatory for Madre Grande Monastery. My earliest biomorphic design, I was actually still in Louisiana when I developed this plan, a landscape architectural office for West Virginia using ferro cement. And that was in about 1964 that I first started working on that project. And here's several other of my biomorphic structure designs. And as you can see, nature is our best guide. Another view of the 1964 design. Ferro cement, you should know, is a very thin and light and economical way to build a cement or concrete structure, and you don't need forms. This structure could be built without any forms at a very reasonable price, very strong, no hurricane's going to destroy it. probably even without any earthquakes destroying it. They're extremely strong. They build boats out of ferrocement here in San Diego, fishing boats, and they should be building buildings out of it. I will say this, a professor should not be only a person teaching the old methods, but also a professor teaching ways to improve the old methods. And I designed several of these biomorphic houses. This is my own house here in La Jolla, built in 1980 with 4 students helping me for $40,000 the house, $5,000 for the parking deck, all built by hand, no huge tractors or any of the cranes or anything like that. We lifted the timbers into place with a come-along. There's a very large truss, as you can see at the second level. It's 40 feet long and 10 feet high, and the main studio is in that area. Here's an elevation of that. Probably my favorite elevation drawing ever made. It's aerodynamic and is also convertible. The rooftop ends fold up in the manner of the Unisphere. Now, sometimes, and quite often, I will develop designs that I will predict for the future. That's rare, but this is done that way. It's a double force field design where the cone and the sphere are working together in a synergetic fashion. A very strong structure from natural disaster, but also strong from bioenergy volume. Some of my buildings here published in Japan, I will say. I'm very proud that I've been published in several countries, and the Japanese did a beautiful job publishing my work on a black background. This is a house I built in above the Wild Animal Park in Escondido for a family of engineers, space engineers. The family were also interested in a vineyard. They took down a whole bunch of avocado trees and replaced them with a vineyard to make their own wine. It faces south here, and the solariums, it's a decentralized plan so that with room, which they had a large site, you spread the house out, and in this case, the family suite is on the left, the parent suite is on the left, the family suite in the middle, the children's suite on the right. And it's spread out so that there's a more spatial orientation to the garden where there's a swimming pool. I call these designs California villas, and I came to this conclusion based on my own travels in Italy and research in historical villa design, where outdoor spaces, the gardens and so on, are extremely important. Out of the Japanese A+U magazine, this page of my concepts, and the most important are the two, one in the middle, the Iran Library project, and the one on the right, the universal spheroid. A small example of the Unisphere in the bottom of that page. On the upper right, you will see the UFO Center for the California desert. This is another view of the Pahlavi National Library in Iran. It was an international competition. Unfortunately, the Shah was thrown out during the competition. Nothing was ever done. A very nice model made by two of my students out of plexiglass. but they do illustrate the structural glass quality of the design and the openable quality. There is a curtain that closes automatically between the roof structure where the restaurant is and the lower structure, which has a garden. It's solar heated from the glass on the southern entrance side. Other views of that design. Now, garden park biotronic prototypes. I mentioned a little bit about that. I believe that any family with a decent yard, garden, could benefit from a structure that is of health and spirit orientation, whether it be music, whether it be exercise, exposure to bioenergy, reading poetry. I admire the Japanese who have a great history in environments of that type, prototypes of that type. Marianne and I have had the fortune of traveling on the Queen Mary II 4 times. We almost did the 5th one, but I won't go into that. But at any rate, I have a huge admiration for our friends overseas. Have been very good to me, have given me many opportunities. The French government invited me to be part of their Architecture and Energy Committee in 1986. And that has meant more to me than probably any of the exhibitions or awards that I've received. I've had the honor to design structures like this desert house and studio. I just got a message from the owner, Diane Reed, who had been a master's student of mine, came to us from religious studies. She made a film on my life and work, which you can see on the internet on YouTube. One of my favorite projects was this African prototype. The University of California, Berkeley invited me to design a camping structure for their anthropology students in Africa. This structure had to be folded up at times when they weren't there, packed away. It turns out there was an aluminum plant not far away. So I developed this, and you can see the very natural, organic, biomorphic quality of the design. The spaces within this will be as good in terms of energy as any that we can build. I'll go through this when I spoke about that one a little bit more. Now, domes are not to be sneezed at. Unfortunately, they haven't been built well. I must say the ones that I've seen have been poorly built by young people without either the technical knowledge or the money to do the job well. I will predict that as we have more space travel, the domes and the spheres are going to become even more important. You can't build any stronger structures from both physical strength against natural disaster and internal strength for health. The double dome interests me in particular. I call this the sports house. I was always interested in sports cars. Virginia and I found out at lunch that we both owned TR3s in the early days, which was an economy English sports car. And these spirited cars inspired me in terms of economy houses. Why should an economy house be ugly, be bereft of any spiritual quality? And so my effort in that behalf has been inspired by sports cars. I call them sports houses. The double dome is extremely strong. It's raised up above the site, so you can have secondary use underneath, parking. And here is a small camping structure bent with built with bent tensile frames, much stronger than a linear structure, boxes. Those boxes you see in the horrible hurricanes in Florida that are destroyed, and Louisiana, shouldn't have to be that way if they were built with the knowledge behind this particular design. Tensile structures, as I mentioned earlier today, in nature, the plant structure, the leaves, the whole structure of a plant and tree is built to take winds and survive. And so this particular tent-like structure I designed for the New Orleans City Park and in a national competition, much more reasonable in price than heavy structures. Radiant architecture, as you well know, is the title I've given to my type of work. You will notice I'm not showing much of my early work in Louisiana because I wanted to focus on the energy structures of my most advanced work. But on the lower middle, number 8 image, is a house I built at New Orleans that Professor Heck at LSU considered my best work in Louisiana. It's a greenhouse living room structure, tensile, with fabric overhead, sun protection, and plants inside. It's designed for many plants. Now, my current designs, this is one of the key efforts I've made recently. 3 years ago, I presented this design at the La Jolla Library. We made a videotape of that presentation. You can see it on YouTube. It is the Radiant Architecture Museum, designed for a site on the SDSU campus. Most of the museum is under the earth. There are 3 spheres at the top. One sphere would be my own work, one sphere would be my students' work, and the third sphere is for outdoor presentations, music, lectures, and so on. I was happy to hear from Marcy early today that she liked this design so much she wanted a copy of it, so I'm happy to oblige. The electric wisdom machine. Well, the concept is for a large electrographic structure in the trees near the Radiant Architecture Museum that would be an inspirational focal at night, using fog machines. Well, I loved to travel to Paris when Marianne and I could, and I developed a lot of friends over there. I missed them. Marianne and I had a marvelous day in London with Dennis Crompton, who was my original host there. At the British Museum, we had a wonderful tea with Dennis. I miss those people a lot, but I'll tell you, there's a huge following in Europe for architecture that is creative and not just standard static stuff. And I believe that's why they welcomed me so much. You'll notice one of my references here is The Secret Life of Plants. That book alone opens minds. You will be amazed at all of the technology that is behind a plant. They have, even to the point where they've been able to trigger the opening of garage doors by mental telepathy working with plants. I've had a lot of exhibitions and presentations in these cities you see. My last big one was in Brasilia, the capital of Brazil, which is truly a magnificent place to visit. The last slide I'm showing is one that means a great deal to me. It has not as much reference to my architecture as to my metaphysical life. And those of you who are who visited with me when I made my 2 earlier presentations will remember the metaphysical graphic work I did that were nicely filmed by Marianne's son, and a finished product is being made of that film. Well, I'm quite devoted to the idea of the inner life of humans. And being here with you today, I've met most of you in this room. I know that all of you have had very interesting lives, and I think it's great that more and more people are speaking about their lives. I'm very grateful that I have friends here and elsewhere who are as much interested in my personal life as my work. So metaphysical graphics is my effort in that regard. This gentleman represents all of the great scholars that I've known, professors all over this country and overseas. Vincent Scully is his name, not the sportsman. This Vincent Scully was the leading architectural historian in America when I knew him. He sent me the telegram that broke the back of the opposition of the people who opposed me and my effort to save the bungalows at the Cove Beach in La Jolla. The telegram that Vincent Scully sent was read at the presentation I made, and the board that reviewed my proposal to save the bungalows there immediately changed their opinion and voted to save those bungalows. Now, the sad thing is the city has not done the job of keeping those bungalows up. They're supposed to. They're National Historical Monuments. But they have never forced the owner to keep them in good shape, and gradually they've deteriorated. And on my birthday 2 years ago, they were burnt in the middle of the night. Now you can imagine how that made me feel. And it's a very sad note, but also it's a good note in that Vincent Scully went out of his way to help us here in La Jolla, sending that telegram. I wish that someone would come along and make sure the city does its job in preserving a National Historical Monument. Why are the bungalows important? They represent affordable housing in a democratic society. Less than 1% of the people in this country can afford to build a house. They were healthier. The verandas were outdoor living rooms where the owners could be with nature. They had larger windows that brought in more fresh air and light into the interior. And of course, they had then this connection to nature, out to the beautiful Cove Beach. Well, my dear friends, I understand they're going to do some work there. I hope they do it well, but I'm afraid that it's going to be another business venture. From what I understand, they're going to move the structure slightly. They're not supposed to do that. And to build some other facsimiles behind them. Well, that doesn't sound good to me, but it's out of my hands. I did the best I could. Well, thank you for your interest, and I will now respond to questions that you might have. Thank you. Yes.
I have a question.
Good.
On my iPhone,
Uh-huh.
when I turn to the weather, when I turn to the weather, there's if it's a clear sky with little dots around the stars, there's little things that go zooming across the screen. Do you know what
Well,
that
why don't we
looks
ask Sam Palmer here, the astronomer?
like? Oh,
I
okay.
would think that would be a good question for him. Oh, you are? Okay, certainly. Uh, Anyone, I don't look at that, so I'm not knowledgeable about that. Maybe someone else here would know about that. No,
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Well, we'll find him another time.
Yeah, he would be the man to talk to.
Okay.
Yes.
How do we access your work on YouTube?
Oh, I'm so happy to respond to that. I welcome you to contact me in any way you can or want to. I'm on Facebook. Everything that you've seen here today has been published on Facebook in depth. Over the past couple of weeks, I've been going over all of this material. So it's all laid out very clearly for you. So if you are on Facebook, simply give me an invitation to be your friend. And you will be able to see, I work for about 3 hours every night on my professional work. And it's not only the architectural graphics, but the metaphysical graphics. So I'm happy to respond in any way I can. Also, email, I'm happy to give you my email address if you want to contact me that way. Yes, well, type in YouTube, YOUTUBE /Eugene Ray, and you will find at least a half a dozen videos that I have been devoted to my life and work. And there are others in the works. I just got a message from New Orleans yesterday that a gentleman who's working on my videos contacted LSU. They have 8 boxes of my archive there. And so a film will come out, and they have 12 videotapes I've made there at LSU. So that will gradually come out. And I'm delighted, here I am 90 years old, that the work is carrying on, and I'm grateful, and I hope when I leave this earth it will continue to carry on. There are a number of my ex-students who are devoted friends, and daily I hear from them, communicate with them. Robert is one, there are many others. I'm so grateful for Marcy and Robert, and helped me on this presentation today. Very grateful for that.
I have something also I'd like to
Yes,
say.
yes.
Okay, I can just, hopefully I don't need that. Okay, can you pull it up? I wanted to say meeting Eugene was so exciting when Bianca had put together the life stories, and he talked about all of this, including the UFOs that I was so fascinated in, because I grew up with my mother believing in UFOs. But also when I moved here 20 years ago, I would drive up Nautilus, right over here, and I would see what he calls his silver ship. Do you have that on there? Is that possible? And I was fascinated with this home for so long. I called it the art house. I called it the rocket ship. I tried to find it because you have to go around the back. And it was when I was when I was buying real estate, when I first moved here, I wanted to buy it. And I
wish you had.
I wish I had. But I mean, it was so remarkable. So all
Thank
these
you.
years later, to find Eugene here as this talented, exciting visionary of an architect and human
Thank you.
being, and this beautiful wife.
Just an old guy doing the
I
best
just
he
was
can.
so thrilled. So that came out of a life story that happened right here in this room. And
Thank
so, Eugene, thank you for all of this, but also
My
that
gratitude.
you satisfied my yearn for this silver ship.
Thank you,
rocket
thank
ship.
you.
That's his home. That was his home for many years.
For a quarter of a century.
Right.
But my wife died in that home, my first wife. And I didn't want to live there anymore.
But it is a remarkable structure. And also, I really need the wisdom piece that you were talking about.
Well, by God, we'll come up with that in whatever form.
So thank you so much.
I'd like to get it built full size.
Okay.
I am hoping that SDSU would get behind our concept for a Radiant Architecture Center on the campus. I was delighted when they had my exhibition there in 2019, they actually put an ad for my exhibition on the billboard out on the highway. You can imagine. I was so startled by that. But I'm hoping that they would take an interest in the design for a Radiant Architecture Museum. And I'm looking for the UFO Center, too. Yes.
I just wanted, this has nothing to do with UFOs. I wanted to know what you think of the art piece, the house that they have tilting off the top upstairs. Did you have anything to do with that?
Where?
Up on the top of one of the UCSD buildings?
What building?
Yeah, that's one of the art pieces, falling star. The houses looks like it's starting.
I'm not familiar with that. Is it SDSU or UCSD? UCSD. I have no knowledge of that.
The house sits up on top of a four-story building.
Oh,
And it's tilted. When you get in, it's like a house, but it's very disorienting because you're not on the flat earth because the house is on the.
is it intended for amusement park purposes?
It's a sculpture. It's a sculpture.
That's what it sounds like, right?
It's a sculpture.
I was far more interested in health and environment than that.
Part of that Stewart collection of art.
Oh, okay. Well, okay. Yes.
Mention the pheromones and the architecture connection.
Oh, well, you didn't hear. I spoke to that earlier. When I met my two wonderful wives, I felt this vibration between us. And I looked into it, and I discovered there was something called pheromones. And we even talked about it at the time, Mary Ann and I. And in architecture, it's vibrations. And you hear people say, oh, he has or she has good vibes or bad vibes. They're not far off the mark. You know, everything is vibrations. Remember, the major quotation here has to do with vibrations. So pheromones are bioenergy vibrations. In architecture, if you can get a space built that makes people feel good and helps their health and the environment, you've been successful. It shouldn't be just some shocking idea, you know, that's absurd. I think it should be something intelligent and profound. That's my idea.
So the pheromones are connected with the living beings.
Absolutely.
Plants
We all relate to other beings and we relate to the environment. Many people feel better outside as a result, right? With the plants. The plant kingdom is very powerful. Read that book, The Secret Life of Plants. You'll be amazed what you will discover in that book.
There was a beautiful plant up the road a piece, just half a block away.
A plant or a plan?
Plant.
A plant. Oh, wonderful. And what is the plant? Do you?
No, I don't know. It was here some months ago.
Uh-huh.
Full bloom, and it looked a lot like what you showed it here. You had a plant on there, opened up.
Oh, the unisphere, universal spheroid, where it's a double skin structure. The skin opens up. Oh, the passion flower, certainly. Passiflora. Actually, this is a cycad, night blooming cirrus. Uh-huh. Yeah. But that's a tensile structure, very biomorphic and very strong, very beautiful, and filled with energy. Energy, everything is energy. Any other questions? Well, thank you so much for being here today. Very grateful. Robert and Marcy, my special thanks. And also, I should say that Marianne's son is videotaping this. I'm very grateful for that. Stephen Laub, is well known in San Diego for his professional videotapes of music presentations. Thank you, Stephen. I appreciate it. What's that? Laub.
Robert.
Oh, Robert Gaughan, Gaughen.
That's you.
Yes, Robert
Kids, I
Gaughan.
want to take a picture of the three of us. Is that
Oh,
okay?
sure.
I'm going to be right there with you and
Okay,
Robert.
I'll put
you
this down.
geniuses.
Well,
I'll be the biggest fan. Okay. Okay, take a second.
thank you
Thanks.
very much. Thank you for coming. And thank you, Robert, for helping out so well.
Yeah, we had a couple of hiccups.
How long did,
Hiccups with the Wi-Fi, but
Yeah.
we did okay.
the time isn't too bad, huh? 3:20?
Yeah.
Good.